Do you like dragons? Do you like chickens? Well, what about chicken dragons? Well, I'm Mercury, and that's a cockatrice, aka my favorite dragon of all time. That's why they're getting an entire video all to themselves. If you have been following my Here Be Dragon series, you would know that I drew 100 unique dragons and I'm making creature sheets for them, but you wouldn't know that I actually made 105, 5 of which were just cockatrices. Now, there is a few reasons why the cockatrices I've made are not being put into the Here Be Dragon series. So they're just not there. And the main reason why they're not there is because the cockatrice is one species. But there's 5 of them, meaning that there's 5 subspecies of cockatrice. And all those 100 dragons are dedicated to different species entirely, not subspecies. So now they get their own cockatrice-themed video. Before I get into my 5 different subspecies, I kind of want to talk about the cockatrice in general, where it comes from and all those type of stuff, because it's pretty interesting to say the least, at least to me. But the first cockatrice that you'll see me drawing in the background is the plains cockatrice, which is the closest one to the actual mythological creature of the cockatrice. You know, the one that I didn't make up. So I just want to get right into the cockatrice lore, so let's go. So the cockatrice comes from Christian mythology. Just let me pause for a moment to give a disclaimer. Christian mythology is a mythology around and inside the Bible, which is a focus on the Old Testament specifically. I am not saying that the Bible is mythology, or that Christianity or any biblical religions are mythology. I am merely looking at the Bible through a mythological lens for the purpose of fantasy. I am not arguing the validity of the Bible. I am talking about a chicken dragon, which happens to have its name originate from Bible. I ask for everyone to be respectful and know that I am not talking about religion when I say Christian mythology at all. Anyway, the first recorded English mention of the cockatrice is in the John Wycliffe translation of the Bible. Cockatrice was used as an English translation for the original Bible, but the cockatrice we have now actually comes from a variety of tales, but its namesake is most likely coming from that translation of the Bible. One of these tales, for example, comes from the crocodile bird, also known as the trochilus, which would land in the mouth of Nile crocodiles and pick out the leeches from its throat. This bird is likely accredited to be the Egyptian plover. But, if someone was telling you about a crocodile bird, what would you think of? I mean, crocodiles and any reptile for that matter were a big part of developing dragons as we know them. But with that, we have to understand that mythology is pretty hard to study. There are lots of unknowns about it. For example, there are many different things across the world. For example, almost every single mythology across the entire world has something accredited to a tree of life, some type of dragon or serpent. Again, every single mythology is actually quite interesting. Now, the modern-day cockatrice is most likely, from as far as my research goes, comes from this tale, which is also from Egypt, and it specifically comes from the destruction of ibis eggs in ancient Egypt. Now, ibises are a bird that are known to eat venomous snakes. Now, what does a bird eating venomous snakes have anything to do about the cockatrice? Well, the cockatrice is a 2-legged dragon that is said to come from a chicken egg that was hatched by a snake, which is why the cockatrice, no matter what interpretation you're looking at, is a blob of chicken and reptile dragon-like features. The origin story, which is similar to that of a basilisk, which is why the cockatrice and basilisk names are often considered interchangeable. However, for the sake of my world, I will not be treating them way, as I'm treating them like actual creatures that exist and roam around the world, and not just myths and tales that we have to stitch together through a variety of stories from a variety of people. The most notable about either of them is the fact that when you look into their eyes, you will turn to stone, unless you're a weasel. So good job to all my weasel friends in the crowd, you have survived this one. That's pretty much all you need to know about the cockatrice in mythology, and also, I put this in a lot of my videos when I'm talking about the fundamental what makes a dragon a dragon. The cockatrice is, in fact, a dragon. Let me be clear about that. And if you think otherwise, you're objectively just wrong. From a mythological standpoint, from a cultural standpoint, to even a fantasy standpoint, cockatrices are dragons. I do have a hard time sticking to the mythological origin of the cockatrice, however, at least in this fantasy world, because under my terminology, the cockatrice would be a hybrid of sorts, which is still kind of true, but it's existed for thousands of years and now has made a more distinguishable trait and variance from what it originally was. Because of being a hybrid, they have a very low chance of laying viable eggs, which does come from their original mythological origin. But due to their pack mentality and petrifying gaze, they do not have much of a problem. However, they generally are still threatened. This applies to all cockatrice variants I have made. So what about the unique things about the plains cockatrice? So now I think it's time to talk just plains cockatrice. What have I made that is different, or what is true of the cockatrice of this world rather than the one just of mythology? They often live, but not necessarily in plains, but they live in large open areas that often have tall grass in them to better stalk their prey. They are about the size of a Labrador, and they are really fast and are flightless. However, they are pretty great jumpers and can glide a bit, but that does take a lot of energy out of them, so it's not really practical, and so they mainly fight on the ground. They come in flocks of 5 to 7 dragons, but it's not unusual to see one solo hunting. A cockatrice, no matter what, are very dangerous, and it's recommended to avoid their territory by any means unless you risk getting turned into a stone statue. And the best way to look out for any of these cockatrices' home is to look for rocks that seem to look like very detailed statues in the middle of nowhere, often with terror on their faces. It is just a general rule on great to keep an eye out of mythological creatures like this. Now, these cockatrices... Now, the purpose of making this video is the cockatrices, they can be found all over the world. I mean, I love them so much, I gotta put them everywhere. And while the plains cockatrice is found often in a savanna or the flat field seen on plain, there are 4 other cockatrices that I've made, and each of making their home in a different environment. First up, we have the one who started this all, the Tundra cockatrice. And just next up, so you know, the desert cockatrice, the wetland cockatrice, and the jungle cockatrice. So let's talk about the tundra cockatrice. The tundra cockatrice was the first one of these I made, and it was by sheer accident too. Over a year ago, I made these 3 speed draws. I sketched them all out of my sketchbook over time, and then colored and lined them digitally. However, there are 3, and they were supposed to be 4, and I don't know why I didn't post the other, but here's the original sketch. Which, when I was making those videos, is when I decided what all my dragons, which I was trying to decide what all these dragons were when I was uploading these videos, and I looked at this one and said, hey, this is cockatrice adjacent. So yeah, that is where I got the idea to make regional cockatrices. And the tundra cockatrice, like many things in the tundra, is often larger. The largest of the cockatrices, it is also the fluffiest, or well, it's covered in a lot more thick feathers. There are even more feathers in places where the cockatrices wouldn't have them, but their tails are still pretty bare. And while the toughest and the largest of the cockatrices, they are also the most docile. Picking fights is a huge waste of energy, especially in climates where food and energy is necessary to live, which is why they don't pick fights unless their food storage is getting low, or when people happen to get too close to their nests. Now, I wanted to make the stone that people turn into the cockatrices slightly different, between the subspecies, as cockatrice stone isn't even true stone, as the creature they turn to stone still holds the same nutritional value, but it still feels like you're eating a rock. It's just a nutritious rock. So I imagine their stone does try to blend in with its environment, mainly as being lighter in color than the plains cockatrice, as they are trying to be able to hide and store things better. But overall, there really isn't much changes besides that. I will say I do not have my original concept sketch for all the cockatrices besides the Tundra run. However, I do have screenshots of the bird that I used to reference for each of them. So I have a Tundra chicken. I will say the original designs didn't follow the bird that much, so I decided to lean into them much more. So that's why you get a Tundra chicken. I'm so glad that never deleting any of my screenshots came in handy once again. Hooray! Speaking of my birds, the next cockatrice is the desert cockatrice, which is based off a roadrunner and a cactus wren. If you've been here for a minute, then you know warmer things are smaller, and the same thing applies to that cockatrice. But let's talk about some features that desert birds specifically develop, which this is not the first desert bird I've talked about, but it is the first one where some of these features actually come into play and matter. So one of these features is the beak, the bird equivalent to panting for dogs, which helps them cool down. And the same goes for darker feathers. Now, what most people would think is when you dress up darker and it's a warm day, you tend to get a lot warmer real quickly. And so you may be wondering how developing darker feathers is a benefit to desert birds. However, it does take in that heat from the sun. However, since it's just on that top layer of their dark feathers, the cool wind easily brushes off that heat away instead of being able to soak more internally and keeping the bird much cooler than if they were a lighter color to blend in with the desert sands. Now, the deserts I'm talking about are obviously the ones that are full of sand and very hard, and I'm also aware that deserts look at like this. In fact, the Tundra cockatrice inhabits some of those frozen deserts. I'm sure everyone knew what I was talking about, but I figured I should at least mention it. Now no one can comment it. Either type of desert is extremely dangerous for its own reasons, but warm deserts are dangerous for their fight. You know what they say, the smaller they are, the closer they are to hell, and deserts are home to some of the smallest animals for the same reason why desert birds' feathers are darker in color typically. They are the most aggressive of the cockatrice, picking fights because they happen to see you, and when they see you, you are normally too close, but they aren't the easiest to point out, so keep a lookout for obsidian, almost glassy, very shiny, highly detailed sculptures, because that's what happens when you get too close, and it's the only warning you really get. Curiosity killed the cat, and it would be a literal cat if a cat happened to be wandering into this subspecies of cockatrice's territory. That's 3 out of the 5 cockatrices done, and here is number 4, the marsh cockatrice, or just in general, the wetland cockatrice, though it is normally associated with marshes, but does not necessarily only inhabit marshes. This one is based off of the king rail and the blue heron. I really love herons, but I did find other bird references, so 1 point for me. This one is the tallest of the cockatrices, but that is different from the largest. The Tundra one is bigger. Consider it like this. This is a cockatrice that has been moved by the corner to be slightly bigger. This one has been stretched out. It's really tall, but isn't bigger by any means. What makes them so tall is mainly their legs are way longer to be able to properly wade through murky waters. And having to wade, they are also the most patient of them. But they aren't that patient. They still are cockatrices. Being able to turn things into stone really helps you catch things, you know? But their beaks are really long and great at picking up these stony fish. The cockatrice does have the biggest wings of the bunch, and again, pretty great jumpers and can use their wings to get up to high places like actual chickens. The next and final notable thing about the wetland cockatrice is the fact that they actually come in smaller flocks. As mentioned earlier, the cockatrice usually comes in flocks of 5 to 7, but the marsh cockatrice usually comes in flocks of 3 to 5. It's not known why from what has been observed. Last but not least, we have the rainforest cockatrice. They are native to, rainforests and jungles and pretty much heavily forested places, especially with a lot of rain. The rainforest cockatrice has the most in common with the plains cockatrice physically. They are about the same size, height, slightly larger wingspan, but not by much, and even similar in aggressiveness. However, their behavior is the most unique. Their talons are notably long and sharp, and their posture is a little different as they tend to lean forward more. This is all due to the fact the mostly flightless dragons don't stay on the ground. They climb trees. People who discovered this subspecies of cockatrice originally thought they were plains cockatrice that ended up in a rainforest somehow, but when they started dashing from the trees towards them, a newfound phobia was discovered. Most of this research team died to these cockatrices, but some of them happened to survive and recognize them as completely different due to their unnaturally ungrounded. These cockatrices, the majority of their life is spent in the trees where they build nests on pythons that have been turned to stone, as well as various branches that have been broken and are now used for their net. They also are excellent gliders and amazing jumpers, which is how they get from tree to tree, but they can pretty much just climb up trees, which is horrifying to witness, but is definitely really neat. Cockatrices in general are really hard to study. Their petrifying gaze is no joke, so they mostly have been observed from afar. And there are still a lot of unknowns about them and their behavior. The same is true for a lot of dragons. But hey, at least we've got something. And wow, this is a long video. Not my longest video, but it's a long one. But I hope you enjoyed it. And I know I enjoyed making it. I mean, I get to rant about my favorite type of dragon. Best Christmas present ever. I have some fun stuff planned, so subscribe, that would be nice, and also comment what's your favorite cockatrice, and what should I make next. As of now, I've only gotten one suggestion, so hey, I'm open to draw stuff, especially because I'm putting extra work into this one suggestion, because of reasons. But yeah, I will see you next week. Have a good day or night. Bye! I really love cockatrices. Oh my goodness. I love them. Look at them.